All right, let's get started. So welcome to our regulatory Fireside Chat series. My name is Mary Alice Olson, and I'm the Vice President of Licensing Strategy with Certemy. And I'm so excited to have Mr. Mark R. Brengelman with us here today. He is a former Assistant Attorney General in the state of Kentucky, where he served as both prosecuting attorney and general counsel for several state health licensing boards. And now he's actually on the flip side, where he's actually representing licensees in cases against the board. So he's changed sides completely. So he's got a very unique perspective. He's also an active participant with CLEAR and FAR, provides trainings, presentations, and just a great regulatory resource. So Mark, we're so glad to have you with us today.
Fantastic to be with you, and thank you for inviting me. It's a little quiet and even lonely here at the office with just the three of us working here now, the three of us being me, myself, and I. It's tough, Mary Alice, working solely for myself, because when I call in sick, I know I'm lying.
Well, you know what? At least you know you're safe, right? That's some really good physical distancing there. So good job.
Well, I'm still able to run the office. I still hold Monday morning staff meetings, and with just me, they go very quickly.
That's good. That's probably a good sign from a mental health perspective that those go quickly. So. All right, so our focus today is to talk about how the regulatory community is responding to COVID-19, but also thinking beyond that, what does the regulatory community look like a year from now, 5 years from now? Really, how long are we going to be feeling the effects of the changes that we've made during COVID-19? So all of our questions kind of revolve around that. And speaking of questions, please feel free to send me questions anytime using the chat feature in Zoom. And at the end, after Mark and I have spoken for about 20-25 minutes, we'll take questions and I'll just run through each of them that have been submitted via chat. And of course, if we don't get to any, I'll make sure that you get your questions answered, and I'll follow up with both you and Mark directly. Oh, and one more disclaimer, Mark is an attorney, as I've mentioned, so he won't be providing any type of legal advice, but very well-informed opinions. So you got that disclaimer in there, Mark?
Sure enough, Mary Alice, thank you.
All right, good. So first off, I'm assuming with COVID-19 right now, you're not having to deal with a lot of disciplinary cases with boards at this time because courts are closed, or are boards kind of postponing some of their disciplinary matters right now?
Well, right now, Mary Alice, that's a very good question. And it's been my experience in this jurisdiction that the workflow has just really slowed down quite a bit. The courts are closed. They're open for emergency purposes only. Things are supposed to go online, like having court appearances the way we're doing this now through Zoom. That has not been glitch-free. Also, boards and agencies and state government have moved to an every other week alternating schedule where half of the workforce works at their brick and mortar office and the other half is expected to work from home, and that keeps social distancing in place. So it's just as a matter of how effective can you be working from home when you work for state government.
Oh, absolutely. And it can definitely be a challenge. I definitely have some friends that are still driving to their board office to pick up mail every day. So yeah, lots of unique challenges at this time. So do you have any boards in Kentucky that have just kind of shut down completely? I've heard from a few different people in fields where maybe their licensees aren't providing essential services, where the board is just effectively shutting down until this pandemic is over and the stay-at-home orders have been lifted.
Mary Alice, I don't have any experience with that, particularly in my jurisdiction, and things like deadlines and application fees and continuing education mandates have all been extended by the governor, who declared an emergency, and under that authority, boards have been waiving and extending those kind of requirements. So if renewals are coming due this month or next, or you need to submit your continuing education hours, don't worry about it, because everybody gets a 90-day grace period due to this emergency. So I don't know of any agencies that are completely shut down, and I'm sure some are very, very busy. For example, pharmacy has been implementing new pharmacy laws that allow for more liberal refills by a pharmacist if someone can't get to their regular physician, but they need an emergency 3-day supply of a prescription medication. Those kinds of things like that are occurring. So it's not at all like life is moving on as normal as we can all imagine, but I think the essential things are getting done as they should be.
No, that's great. And you bring up some good examples of how boards are lessening restrictions because of this crisis in order to make sure they have as many people, boots on the ground actually helping, meaning those boards that are providing licenses to essential service providers. Do you think that this is a time where boards should just in general be going through all of their rules and regs and trying to think of really any way that they can lessen restrictions and make things as easy as possible for practitioners? And do you have any kind of examples of ways that they should be doing that?
Well, this is a trying time for everyone, obviously, to implement the law in the spirit and the letter of the law. I think boards and agencies are doing the right thing by prioritizing and triaging, if you will, the kinds of requirements that they need to let up on, like something obvious, as I mentioned, continuing education compliance and deadlines. Everybody's getting a 90-day free pass on that. Whether you've completed it or not, you get an extra 90 days. You don't have to ask for it, in other words. But also on an as-needed basis, boards are looking at laws, for example, relaxing face-to-face clinical supervision requirements, so that if you're required to meet with someone you are supervising clinically who is still in training, like with an associate credential, waiting to get their full license by putting in enough hours and maybe waiting to pass the test, all of that stuff is moving and allowed to be done online now by two-way interactive video, much as we're doing here. Now, the next question you may ask me, I jump ahead, is, will that kind of change be permanent? And we'll have to see. For two reasons. I think there will be one camp of people who say, it worked flawlessly, I never need to meet with this person. Do you realize they live 25 minutes away and have to drive to my office so we can meet that face-to-face requirement? And advocate for that to be done all the time with a permanent change in the law. And I think the other camp will be quite simply that they never could get it to work and it was terrible, and that they value the face-to-face relationship. So we'll see as to how many of those kind of things stick in the long run. It may be the kind of situation where there'll be more flexibility, where you can pick and choose, where things will be required to be face-to-face, but if you want to do two-way interactive video, that you would be allowed to. We'll just have to see whether those kinds of mandates and changes will become permanent, and in which ways.
I think that's a great point, and something that boards that I've been speaking with are struggling with. So, obviously there's a dramatic need to reduce regulations that impact someone's ability to, for example, a nurse or a doctor or a pharmacist to be able to provide services right now. But then how do boards ensure that they're still protecting the public, right? Because first and foremost, that's our primary purpose, is we've got to protect the public. So how can we ensure that that's happening now while understandably lessening restrictions?
Every board and agency will have to look at their laws and see what sticks in the long run, as I mentioned. There are some things, in my opinion, that are just as effective or even more effective electronically, such as the vast majority of state licensure boards, in my experience, have moved to online renewal. You don't have to fill out a piece of paper and photocopy all of your continuing education certificates, stick it in an envelope with enough postage, whereas it has to travel through the mails. Obviously, we're all used to ordering things on Amazon and eBay or online shopping and such, and licensure renewals and applications have moved that way as well. And it's probably quicker and better than a paper and pencil process. On the other hand, there's value in face-to-face meeting, and that's why state government meetings are required to be held in person face-to-face with limited exceptions. Clinical supervision is required to be done face-to-face. Most continuing education has to be done in a live, in-person classroom presentation type format, although that is changing. That is certainly changing.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the concern is, we lessen restrictions, but then how do we put some of these restrictions back in place once this crisis is over, because they really are in the best interest of the public. So there's a difference between, lessening restrictions for a certain period of time, and most state boards have some provision in state law or rules already that allows for a certain amount of temporary practice, for example, across state lines. But I think it's really different when you're looking at something like this, so unprecedented, that's going on for months and months and months. I think you do have to start to think about, what is the public protection impact, and is there a concern? And then how do you pull back again and say, okay, we need to go back to where we were before.
Absolutely. And what you've identified is the obvious questions people are asking insofar as what can we do when there's an emergency declared? How can we change our law to increase flexibility and access and all of that stuff? Nobody has yet, except for you, Mary Alice, have asked the follow-up question. The better question is, what do we do when an emergency is declared to be over and past and those emergency powers fade away and all the regulations that require things like face-to-face contact will, quote unquote, snap back into place and you'll start to enforce those again. Now, whether those will be changed and amended in the long run, again, we have yet to see that. But nobody but you are asking the follow-up, the right questions, which is, what happens when there's not an emergency? Everybody's asking what happens now that there is one? What happens when there isn't one? How do things snap back into place?
Oh, well, you give me too much credit, but thank you. I definitely, it's definitely something I think about, but I know others are absolutely considering this and thinking about it too. And, you know, especially since you work on the disciplinary side of things, do you think that boards, and I want to be careful how I phrase this, obviously boards are going to look at every complaint that comes in and it's a really important part of their process, but do you think that boards should prioritize especially egregious complaints, or and maybe the better question is kind of not disregard, but kind of put on hold complaints that maybe are less concerning? Basically, should they be handling their disciplinary process in a different way right now?
Well, in my opinion, Mary Alice, boards and agencies always have to do that. In fact, they never have enough resources to do everything that they need to do or want to do or should do, at least at the same time. So they're always triaging cases. Now that becomes even more pressing because of the slowed down pace of state government work, with not being able to meet in person. So instead of driving into the next county or the next city to interview someone face to face, you may be stuck with arranging a Zoom conference by interview or talking to them by telephone, which may or may not be as effective. Now, I still do work for the government. I work for a legislative branch agency, and their hallmark was they always had instructed me, we want you to meet with people and interview them in a complaint matter face to face. And that is fallen by the wayside when someone is a 3.5 or 4 hour drive away. They don't see the cost effective of that to have a 7 or an 8 hour travel day where you might meet with someone for 55 or 60 minutes. And even for someone who's locally, they say, don't meet with them in person because of the social distancing. You just need to have a conversation with them over the phone and arrange that in advance to complete your interview.
Yeah, I mean, this could absolutely result in boards being able to use this opportunity to streamline operations and to figure out, you know, if there are some rules where, you know what, maybe we can lessen a restriction around continuing education and the way that's completed, for example. But I think there's absolutely going to be other pieces that boards are going to have to kind of reinstitute. Like, for example, in New Jersey, they're allowing attorneys to go ahead and begin practicing without having passed the bar exam. I think that's something that is happening now that won't happen in the future. And I think it is going to be challenging for boards to kind of maneuver that. I also wonder, and would love to get your feedback on this, do you think it'll be harder for boards to require, you know, in-person activity? Let's just say continuing education, for example. Very few boards offer 100% continuing education, you know, can be online. Do you think it'll be harder for them to impose those restrictions, or in some cases reimpose those restrictions after this crisis is over? With the idea being that it's public protection, if they can't prove that the public wasn't harmed during this time? Or is that not even something we should be worried about?
Well, I don't think that's something we should be worried about at this time, Mary Alice, because you're asking for proof. And so many times there's not proof that something works or is effective. And legally, a law only has to be rationally related to a legitimate government purpose. And you might as well be arguing about the speed limit, because can we really say that 25 miles an hour over on this street is all that much safer than 30 miles an hour on the next block or the next street? Or that 30 miles an hour really helps get you where you're going that much faster than 25 miles an hour? So things like continuing education may go to the route where you may have the option of getting all of your hours online. But I think you asked a question about how do we move things back to the way they were when the emergency is over and that is declared that there is no longer an emergency. All those laws, I believe, will snap back into place. But the effects of that in the long run is yet to be seen. Remember, Mary Alice, faster is not always better or more valued. The agency of which I spoke that was proud that they always wanted a face-to-face interview took value in that, because the people that complained, these are pretty high-ranking people that are respondents, and for people that complain and the high-ranking respondents, it was valuable to the agency to have me start off an interview with, I was glad to drive 7 or 8 hours because the agency really, really wants to see that I interview face-to-face in person. They take it that seriously. So there is value in that. Yeah, you could phone it in with Zoom or Skype, and it could be substantively just as effective, but we need to look at the subjective elements as well. We're in uncharted territories, and I think the government has done very well in my jurisdiction in keeping up the workload and such. I think the $64,000 question Mary asked will be, what will the long-term impact be and how many things like this will change permanently? And that is a question that's being asked in every sector right now, like curbside pickup and delivery at grocery stores, or restaurants that will now move to the majority of their business being takeout. I've understood that there's a major national hamburger franchise that shall remain nameless that already did 60% of their business through the drive-through. Is that the way it's going to be at every restaurant and establishment? Where will the good old days be of the coffee shop where you could sit down with a cup of coffee and the newspaper, if you remember what a newspaper is, and socialize, or have your cup of joe and a newspaper?
No, you're right. It's absolutely going to be changing. And I think, look, in some ways for the better. I mean, what boards are really good at is protecting the public. They're absolutely excellent at following that mission. And I think if there's a silver lining of this whole crisis, is that it might be an opportunity to relook at some rules and regs and decide, okay, in what ways can we be more flexible with the practitioner? Because we sort of had to be during this time. How well did that go? What sort of challenges did we see with that, and was it sustainable? Is this something that we can do in the future? And I think that's always a great thing, right? To kind of look at things through a new lens and see how it can be improved upon. So that makes sense to me.
I agree as well. I was wondering if there was a topic about it was kind of described as moving up the chain and allowing practitioners to do more than their scope of practice.
Yeah, so I was actually just on a CLEAR webinar, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, and those webinars are great. And there was a regulator from Australia that was talking about the concept of scoping up and scoping down. And so it was really interesting. And they were just an idea that they were considering to get more boots on the ground serving people. But essentially, if your skill set and your training would allow you to practice at a higher level in a role that you wouldn't normally practice in, but your scope of practice is what prohibits you from doing that, basically loosening those restrictions so that you have more people providing, nursing duties, for example. And then likewise, scoping down, having really highly qualified practitioners that maybe have, a ton of training, a ton of education, licensed at a high level, but also have the skill set to perform lower level activities that are actually what's really in demand right now. So I'd love your thoughts on that and sort of the long-term effect of that sort of model, scoping up, scoping down on the regulatory community.
Well, I'm not as familiar with scoping up, but I would say that scoping down is very possible insofar as you may have a healthcare practitioner with a high level of skills who transfers into something with a slightly lower level of skills, if I can say so figuratively. I think scoping up would be like a nurse who works in a pediatric outpatient office is not going to be comfortable or protective of the public by being hauled into brain surgery in the operatory. But certainly you could have them go to the other way. And it ought to be easier for people with out-of-state licenses to get licenses in this jurisdiction, either permanently or temporarily. It ought to be easier for people to reinstate an inactive license or to unretire a license in an emergency situation. So we've seen situations where also that there's cross-scoping, lateral moves, where, as you said about the law graduates, here we are about to head into the month of May, and nursing schools and other schools and law schools are saying, okay, we're going to finish out some online training, and then poof, you graduate and are eligible to take the test, or maybe we're going to waive the test for 6 months and you're eligible to practice. Mm-hmm. And so moving those people very quickly into those kind of positions is something that should be done. Now, in a true, like a bioterrorism, nuclear, chemical, or biological attack, you know, people won't have time to ask questions. Can a veterinarian triage human beings or give injections to human beings? If you're talking about that kind of trauma or emergency, and there may be places like in New York City where that kind of emergency is the now. Don't really know what all is going on, but if there's a healthcare practitioner out there, a chiropractor, a veterinarian, a pharmacist that can be on the front lines and saving lives, I'm all for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's everybody's goal for sure. So one area that I know you have a lot of expertise in, and I believe you offer several webinars on this yourself, is the area of HIPAA privacy, security, and breach notification rules. So a lot of boards right now are issuing temporary practice permits for telehealth, telepractice in a variety of ways. Can you walk us through just a little bit of those nuances and maybe what practitioners can do now that they wouldn't normally be able to do, and how you see that changing in the future?
Well, it's been my experience in this jurisdiction, Mary Alice, that especially mental health professionals are moving to a telehealth type practice in mental health for equal reasons. The therapist doesn't want a parade of clients coming in face to face, and the patients don't want to be going in to see a therapist face to face. So it seems like, for the most part, online teletherapy, where there's an existing doctor-patient type relationship, is a good thing. The Federal Health and Human Services Department has waived HIPAA sanctions and penalties for the temporary use of non-secure communications like Apple FaceTime with a client, Skyping or Zoom with a client, because I tell all of my clients that those types of electronic communications, texting and email, are not secure. If you're going to comply with HIPAA, you need to use a secure platform. On the other hand, although this has changed pretty recently in my jurisdiction, states have not loosened their own telehealth regulations. For example, in my jurisdiction, in the practice of psychology, there is a telepractice administrative regulation that tells you the things you have to do to engage in telepsychology. And it's 9 years old, Mary Alice. It dates back to March 2011. How do I know this? I wrote it for the Kentucky Board of Examiners of Psychology at the time and helped them promulgate through notice and comment rulemaking that telehealth administrative regulation. It didn't have a lot of wide applicability, because just because you could do it and here's how to do it didn't mean insurance companies had to pay for it until recently. So, so keep in mind that because you can use non-secure communications doesn't mean that state law allows you to do that. And I would respectfully submit, in conclusion to this point, that you can use non-secure communication for types of things like scheduling, rescheduling, canceling appointments, and such like that. But if you're going to provide a clinical service, you need to comply with existing state law. And I'm told that there are platforms and softwares you can purchase. It does cost money. You just can't pick up your smartphone and do a face-to-face Skype or a Zoom. But that there are mental health software and platform out there that you can pay for and subscribe to that does provide a secure video connection. So read the headline of some article about mental health saying 10 years of change has happened in about a week, because the surge, the tsunami towards online mental health practice, much in the same way we're having this online Zoom Fireside chat. We have everything except the Fireside. So
yeah, sorry about that. I should have figured that out somehow.
We'll do that next time.
All right, next time.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for all of that great information. We just have a few minutes left, and we have received a couple of questions while we were chatting, which is fantastic. So I'm going to bring those up, and you'll just forgive me for a second while I kind of read through this to make sure I get the grasp of it. All right, so we got it. Thank you so much. That's always nice. So we have the board chair of the Indiana Behavioral Health and Human Services Licensing Board. The question is, do you have a sense that all 50 states have relaxed their rules governing telehealth initiatives? Great question.
That's an excellent question from my neighbor in a sister jurisdiction across the river in Indiana. Hello. Let me add, I don't know what's going on in all 50 states. You would be able to check with your own state licensure board and professions about what laws or regulations have been relaxed. Again, in my jurisdiction, there was the 2011 law for psychologists, 2017 law for counselors, and a 2019 law for marriage and family therapists. So some of those laws have been around on the books for a while and are otherwise, I'm going to say in air quotes here, kind of easy to meet because you can buy commercially available software to be able to conduct that. But otherwise, I think that every state is otherwise either implementing their existing laws or waiving those kind of requirements, specifically waiving the requirements of using a secure encrypted communication.
Yeah, I agree completely. That's definitely been my experience as well. And we have another question from Kimball. Thank you, Kimball, for your participation. Again, the Indiana board chair. So he has a great question. This is something I dealt with in Louisiana a lot. He said, we've had to cancel our last 2 board meetings in part because of the open door policy to allow citizens to be present. Couldn't we just publish a virtual address and have the meeting that way? So basically online board meetings, and how can you ensure that the public is still able to participate?
Well, Kentucky is a little bit fortunate to reflect on because we have an old 1994 televideo open meetings law provision, which was well before Skype, FaceTime, and those kinds of communication. But basically, from the way our law works, state government meetings can be held by real-time synchronous audio video. You're not allowed to just call it in by speakerphone. You have to be able to see and hear them. And the way the public can participate is one of 2 ways. First is there is an actual physical site of the meeting where maybe there is one staffer and the board chair is running the video program with a widescreen TV in the classroom, and people from around the jurisdiction, around the state, are able to log on. And so are members of the public. If you, just like they were invited, you're a member of the public, you were invited to this webinar. And so the second way of doing it would be to have it by online login only, where there is no classroom with any person holding the meeting or directing it. It's all online. I would submit to say, Mary Alice, that none of us are in the same place at the same time right now. You and I are 600 miles apart and able to conduct this very effectively. So look into your own state law about what kind of real-time synchronous audio video requirements there are and that allow the public to attend either by traveling in person to the video site, the home base of a meeting, or to be able to log on remotely from anywhere.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great feedback. Thank you so much. And I did get an additional chat from Kimball that you answered that question for him, and he really appreciates it. But you're absolutely right. Talking to your AG, like, of course, you're the perfect person to answer this question, right? And asking them what your open meeting law is, or digging through that yourself and trying to figure that out as well. I know in Louisiana it was very strict, but during this pandemic, they are now allowing for boards to actually meet telephonically, whereas previously you couldn't make any board decision unless you were in person together. So definitely seeing relaxed laws and rules on these types of issues, because the functioning of the board still has to go on, right?
Absolutely, and you're correct about the way those meetings can work in other jurisdictions. And there may be a relaxing of the audio video requirement where temporarily speakerphone is good enough. Mm-hmm. And yet, you know, my experience in working with you good people from all around the United States is that every state does the same kinds of things in very, very similar ways, although the terminology can certainly be different. But then there are a couple of situations where states literally do it the opposite. My colleagues in North Dakota have such an unpopulous state, a sparsely populated state, that their law only requires their agency, their licensure board, to meet in person, face-to-face one time a year, and tele-audio video is the way they always meet in North Dakota. So for us to be grasping and saying, oh, we're moving to this electronic audio video meeting, we'll call North Dakota because that's all they do because of the population base of the state, the distance of the state. Is my understanding that they are required by law to have one in-person meeting a year, and then tele-video meetings is all they do the rest of the time. So go figure. It's not just different, it's literally the opposite.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and also highlights the importance of collaborating with each other and other executive directors and board members in other states too. So, well, Mark, thank you so much. This has been really informative. Certainly appreciate your time and everyone's time for participating today. I know we're living in an unprecedented, difficult time, and so everybody's time is all that much more valuable. So what we'll be doing is producing a video of this so that everybody can have access to this later, can read through it later, or watch it later, actually. And if you have any questions for Mark that you weren't able to get answered today, please let me know, and I'll work with you to get those addressed. And thank you all so much, and hope you have a good day.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thanks, Mark.